Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. Trump goes to North Carolina and California. Hey, it's sort of like that book you read in high school, Tale of Two Cities. North Carolina welcomed President Trump warmly. They were facing threats of being homeless last week due to FEMA threatening to end temporary housing. He criticized the ineffectual and slow actions of FEMA. In fact, he even mentioned getting rid of FEMA since it has not been helping North Carolina. North Carolina, as you know, took the worst of Hurricane Helene, which marched up the East Coast months ago. He promised more help and quickly. He also mentioned sending the Army Corps of Engineers to get the roads and bridge reconstruction going. Folks, it's been a slow road over in western North Carolina, and that shouldn't be happening to our American citizens. Trump then flew to California, where Governor Newsom met him as he landed. The story had been that Trump did not plan to meet with him. Not sure if that had been true. The death toll in California, sadly, has now reached 29. While the damage is likely to be as much as $200 billion, Trump's interaction with Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles was an interesting contrast of how to be a real president and how not to be a mayor of any city, much less a huge city. Trump demanded that California require ID to vote in order to get federal aid. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. I hold the mindless governors of California responsible for the damages and deaths in California. Decades of poor forest management and failure to address California's chronic water issues produced this result. Of course, an electorate stupid enough to elect Newsom, Bass, and now Schiff as senator has found out that elections have consequences. The tagline of one commentary I read caught my eye. The same politicians responsible for LA's destruction shouldn't be overseeing its rebuilding. Even though Bass has now promised to expedite permits and reduce red tape to help reconstruction, does any sensible person believe her? The other issue is the huge cost of building in California, and now it'll be even more expensive given the massive damage and needs. With famous actors with mansions competing for scarce resources, will the average person have a chance to rebuild anytime soon? All the rest of us can do is to hope things will turn out better in North Carolina and California, but each state needs to focus on using its own resources effectively. If there's a silver lining to the fires in California, as I've mentioned before, we are seeing Newsom's governorship go up in smoke, literally, that will hopefully mean nobody will ever consider him as a presidential candidate. Not that I did before this tragedy, of course. Trump sets a record with executive orders. That's been a headline all over the place. Even though Trump promised a huge batch of executive orders on day one, much of the press keeps acting amazed at the pace with which this has taken place. I do note that Joe the Demented did about the same on his first day, doing his best to destroy what Trump had done in his first term. Turnabout is fair play in both directions, folks. I do want to condemn the political situation in America where there is no cooperation between the parties. Running the world's largest economy with executive orders is simply wrong. There should be an orderly legislative process that focuses on what is best for the people of America. Of course, the courts have already jumped in and blocked a handful of his orders. Most recently, Trump tried to stop federal grants. This became confused because some claimed there would be a stop to Social Security and Medicare, which was false, of course, still created a bit of a stir over there. With the stroke of a penny, eliminated LBJ's Executive Order 11246, which created an affirmative action requirement for government contractors along with a bureaucracy to enforce it. I agree with this action as this made sense at the point that LBJ did it, but even the libs' favorite former SCOTUS justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, predicted that the time would be up soon for affirmative action. Well, it is now. Even if a Democrat follows Trump, I doubt it will be reinstated. In the interest of full disclosure, I am an expert on affirmative action plans and the compliance requirements. But in the last few years, there's been little call for my services in this area in any event. In other words, things in the industry have sort of floated away, and it's about time to put that cow down. The death of DEI was rapidly approaching in the private sector, and Trump has pretty much put the nail in the coffin for the public sector. The departing Biden administration tried to keep it in place by covering it up, but I do not think those efforts will last very long. Often haste makes waste. The effort to reduce the federal workforce is already a mess, in my opinion. First, Trump told federal workers to come back to work in the office. That made sense. The idea was that many would quit rather than return. However, before that could work, he then announced a far too generous severance plan. This is offering federal workers 8 months of pay and benefits to quit now. Some of those positions actually need to be filled. I predict the best and the brightest will probably take the money and go to the private sector. But the losers who cannot compete in the private sector will be left on our payroll. This is not the right way to redone a reduction in force, also known as a RIF. In fact, that is part of my personal expertise, but of course, the folks in Washington didn't bother to ask me. We will continue to provide frank commentary as this administration proceeds. Nobody and nothing is off limits in either direction. ICE raids have begun in earnest, as promised by Trump and one of his key appointees, Tom Homan. His new boss is Kristi Noem, who's been approved as the head of DHS. Most know that she served in Congress and was the governor of South Dakota most recently. She got to work fast as she even appeared the very next day at an ICE raid in New York City. I'm going to suggest right now that the brilliant, articulate, and awfully good-looking conservative Kristi Noem might be our first female president. Once these illegals are picked up, time to dump them out of the country. In a fascinating one-day interaction, Trump sent 2 military planes to Colombia with the trash collected by ICE. Their socialist president, Petro, said that the plane could not land since the inmates were being shackled on the planes. Remember that these were convicted criminals, not just illegals. Hey, somebody mentioned the movie Con Air. Yeah, let's not have these criminals running around in the airplanes. Doesn't sound like a good idea. Remember, these were convicted criminals, not just illegals. So Trump said he would slap a travel ban on key officers of Colombia, along with 25% tariff on everything from Colombia immediately, and make it 50% shortly thereafter. By the way, a couple key imports from Colombia are flowers and coffee. A few hours later, Colombia's president offered to send his personal plane for the criminals. Raids have continued across the country, including our base here in Houston, Texas. Generally, the reaction of the public has been good. Of course, there have been some hysteria about illegals who are not convicted criminals being picked up at the same time. My sympathy is not there. Further, the concept that illegals are doing the work that Americans won't do is flawed. For instance, for agriculture, America has had a guest farm worker program in place for decades. And what about all those who played by the rules and came here legally? I understand there may be some restaurants and hotels which will have to start playing fair by paying everybody who works there legal wages. I fully support that. I do not work with any employer who employs illegals or attempts to avoid the wage laws here in the United States. We should be supporting that policy. In an announcement that will surprise absolutely nobody, except maybe Joe the Demented, the CIA now favors the lab leak theory on the origins of COVID-19. John Ratcliffe, the new director of the CIA, has declassified the latest announcement for public release. So the CIA has now joined the FBI and the Energy Department in identifying a laboratory mishap in Wuhan, China, as the probable source of the COVID virus. This tragedy has killed more than 1.2 million Americans and over 7 million people worldwide. The saddest part of the story is that the gain of function research that led to the development of this virus in Wuhan was likely partially funded by the US government. I note that more and more is becoming public about Anthony Fauci and his actions, this back in 2014. Note that these actions were always against federal policy. This is the reason Biden pardoned him on the way out the door. I'm glad to see that Trump recently struck the $400,000 a year being spent by the feds for bodyguards for Fauci. He can afford to pay for his own. And by the way, Trump also struck bodyguards for General Milley, and they're saying right now that Milley may get busted from a 4-star down to a 3-star. Interesting stuff, folks. Trump appointees start to run the gauntlet in D.C. The coverage of the RFK hearings have been nearly hilarious as the Democrats jump on their former Democratic colleague and even Caroline Kennedy, as if anybody cared. I remember little Caroline when she was the little daughter of JFK and Caroline and Jackie Kennedy up in Washington, D.C. Well, she's now a hardened old lady, and she's saying bad things about her uncle, and I think it's a sad commentary on that family. In any event, we'll see how that turns out. In an announcement that will surprise absolutely nobody, except maybe Joe the Demented, the CIA now favors the lab leak theory on the origins of COVID-19. John Ratcliffe, the new director of the CIA, has declassified the latest announcement for public release. So the CIA has now joined the FBI and the Energy Department in identifying a laboratory mishap in Wuhan, China, as the probable source of the COVID virus. This tragedy has killed more than 1.2 million Americans and over 7 million people worldwide. The saddest part of the story is that the gain of function research that led to the development of this virus in Wuhan was likely partially funded by the US government. I note that more and more is becoming public about Anthony Fauci and his actions, this back in 2014. Note that these actions were always against federal policy. This is the reason Biden pardoned him on the way out the door. I'm glad to see that Trump recently struck the $400,000 a year being spent by the feds for bodyguards for Fauci. He can afford to pay for his own. And by the way, Trump also struck bodyguards for General Milley, and they're saying right now that Milley may get busted from a 4-star down to a 3-star. Interesting stuff, folks. Trump lists Biden's hold on the 2,000-pound bombs that were supposed to go to Israel. When Trump asked about this, he simply said, hey, they paid for them. This was part of the Biden effort prior to Trump getting into office to play both sides by preventing Israel from doing all it can to protect itself. Trump lists sanctions on Alaskan energy. This was something that should never have happened in the first place. Alaska is America's gold mine. One source notes that Alaska's GOP Senator Dan Sullivan lists as many as 70 Biden assaults on the state of Alaska. Biden's efforts to frustrate sensible efforts to utilize Alaska's natural resources never made any sense. In particular, Alaska has huge reserves of natural gas, which can be converted to LNG, a clean fuel which can be shipped around the world. Biden also blocked lease sales and other types of development. This may turn out to be one of the most positive developments for all Americans with the election of Trump. The tech-heavy NASDAQ, as they say, crashed recently due to the announcement of China's new AI model, DeepSeek. Technology stocks, including NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Tesla, lost $1 trillion in market value on fears that DeepSeek, which is much cheaper, would be a serious competitor in the AI space. The fear behind this silly sell-off was that the Red Chinese might be ahead of the USA in AI. Given that Congress voted last year to ban TikTok due to spying by the Chicoms, why on earth would any company or university want to risk their valuable data with something called DeepSeek? That is, if it's even competitive with current AI models. It is far too soon to tell. Note that NVIDIA's powerful AI chips are not supposed to be sold to China. While China claims that it is not using the chips, I've heard on the street that most likely, with near zero security in the United States, they were probably using those chips to create whatever they created, not some cheaper chips developed by the Chicoms. By the way, in the interest of full disclosure, I do own stock in NVIDIA and Tesla. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I am sure that you will agree with me that she deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Etti Lazarian, who learned leadership skills early in life, completing her mandatory service in the Israeli Defense Forces, known as IDF, of course, where she rose to become Staff Sergeant in the Gavati Brigade, an elite infantry unit. She followed that by completing both her BA in Finance and her MBA at the University of Derby in the United Kingdom. Several years later, Etti moved to the United States to become a god, General Operations Director for Insignia LLC, where she oversees a variety of real estate projects that the firm handles. As well as being involved in Insignia, Etti, as a family office principal, oversees family investments in other asset categories. One of her interests is the evolution of EV technologies, and she directs investments into various projects around that space. One of her deepest passions in life is philanthropy, a passion she has passed on to her 3 daughters. She is involved in projects from food distribution during the COVID crisis to arranging small suitcases for children in shelters. That passion continues with new projects of each and every day under a simple philosophy: be kind. We welcome Etti Lazarian for her first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you, David, for this warm introduction.
Well, we're delighted to have you. We've been in communication with you for several months here, and we've been trying to coordinate schedules. So we're just super happy that you were able to work us into your schedule.
Yes, thank you so much for hosting me. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited about this beautiful opportunity. Thank you.
And we're excited about having you here. As you know, we ask 3 prepared questions and then we wrap up. You have an amazing background with your experience in the Israeli military and then to the UK and then from there to the United States. What brought you to the USA and how would you compare it to where you've been previously?
You know, beginning of my career was in the military, where I learned the meaning and understood what hard work really is. I mean, you're working hard, but this is to protect your life, to protect your country. So I think it's really important for every person really to join the army, to understand what it is to actually protect the land that you live on. And then from there, you can go into business or whatever you choose to go in your life. But I feel like it gives you like a really good ground. And also the army gives you like really good protocols, teaches you how to do things. Because if you're not following protocols in the army, you die. So it's really important to follow those procedures. And this is what I'm implementing in my business as well. Once we understand how things work and we make them work in a proper way, we elevate it to the next level and to the next level. I started small in business. My business career started actually in Guangzhou, China. I used to travel there and import things from there. I used to work in London. I used to work in Oxford, in Israel, of course. And when I came to America, I scaled it to the next level. And I went into real estate, which, of course, we started small with small properties. And now we have much larger scale of operation. And this is what we do.
Well, it sounds like you've covered quite a bit of the world, and I've worked a little bit along those lines, but mostly as a tourist. But it sounds like some very cool things to do. So you were involved
Yes.
in many types of businesses, especially real estate projects. You emphasize a strong focus on diversity. Explain how that helps to move your investing forward and the types of investments that you do.
So I think our specialty is moving with the market. So whatever we do now, it doesn't mean that that's what we're going to do 5 years from now. We do have a protocol and a good 5-10 year plan of how we're taking the company and in what direction we're moving. But we're very big in working with the community, working with municipalities, working with individuals. I do a lot of work with young female entrepreneurs. If they want to start a business, I guide them how to do it. And I'm trying to implement everything I have going on in the community into my business. And so far, it's going very well. I can say that we started with residential townhouses. We moved into mixed use, shopping centers, retail. I built a lot of restaurants in my career. And now we're doing office building, multifamily, and a lot of projects that helps the community and create, really good things for the community, where there is a hero unit, where I put a lot of police officers and firemen in my multifamily units, and whatever we can do to help the community and elevate the environment that we are living in.
And how do you tie that to the approach to diversity?
How do I tie? We listen. I think my biggest talent of what I do is actually I am boots in the ground, and I listen to the community and I understand what the community is in need. If it's a community center event, so where we're building the centers and the mixed use that we're building, we're allocating a certain area for the community center. We are allocating certain areas for really whatever the community, like a little park, a little mommy and me classes that we do. I actually take the time and walk all the properties that we have and listen to what people are in need. And I think that's the little edge that we have going for us. And that's why we're so successful at what we do, because we really listen to the need and we supply the need that people have.
Fascinating situation. And you've emphasized philanthropy in your endeavors. What do you recommend to other small and family businesses in terms of how do you become involved in such positive projects?
I think, sorry, I disconnected it. Philanthropy. I have a different approach about philanthropy. The way I look at philanthropy is you have to, not everybody, but many people approach philanthropy is, if I have $1 million, I'm going to give it to a certain organization, and this is my philanthropic mission. For me, the way I look at it, this is donation. You just made a donation. Thank you so much for a donation. It's fantastic. We really appreciate it. But for me, philanthropy is actually go to the ground level and understand what people are in need. And I think the best example I can give you is those suitcases that we did for the children. I volunteer with my children at, it's called Loving Hands. It's a women and children shelter. And we saw my daughter, I think she was 4 years old, and we saw a beautiful, young, gorgeous, blonde kid, blue eyes, beautiful, beautiful little angel. He came with this giant hefty bag because his mom said, we have to leave the house immediately before daddy will kill us. And she just went like this, and she collected everything from the closet and put it in a large hefty bag. And this 4-year-old is walking around this hefty bag. And my daughter is like, this is just horrible. What can we do for him? And I'm like, Mia, what do you think will make him happy? And she said, I think we should buy him a Batman bag. Let's buy him a nice Batman suitcase. So we went to Walmart and we saw the Batman suitcase. And then we talked to the manager of Walmart was there, surprisingly enough. And this is also a philanthropic, entrepreneurial adventure for her, because she just figured out that she could ask the Walmart guy, but she could buy a suitcase for $20, but she could also ask the Walmart manager, to donate 100 suitcases, and then she can give it to the shelter, and all those children that pass through the shelter will have an Elsa bag or a princess bag or a Batman or Spider-Man or whatever you want. And she told the manager what happened, and immediately he gave her what she asked. So that was a teaching moment for my young child about business. You want something, you see something, target it, make it a mission for yourself to get it done, and you will get it done. And the satisfaction that a 4-year-old has to do something so great for the community, you can't translate it to anything. This is something remarkable.
How old are your daughters now?
So my daughters now are 17, 15, and 17, 15, and 13. We started philanthropic mission, but we don't call it mission, we call it a mitzvah. Being Jewish, we call it a mitzvah. So I'm teaching my girls to be good people. I'm teaching them to listen to their environment. I'm teaching them small acts of kindness, to open the door if someone needs the door open for them, help a lady carry the bag to her second floor if she lives in the second floor. Just be aware of what's around you. If someone needs help, just help them. And you'll be surprised, people are just like this. They don't see what's completely ambivalent to the environment. They don't see what's going on around them. And I think that's our biggest disadvantage that we have as a community. We used to be a little village, but now we're so big and there are so many people around us. So that's what happens.
It's interesting you say that. And part of that is what I call good manners. And I grew up, my mother had poor balance. So she was naturally left-handed. And in Catholic school, they hit her left hand with a ruler to force her to write right-handed. This, of course, is in the 1930s. And the superstition was that left-handed people were at a disadvantage or bad people. So in any event, apparently, if you're forced to write with the wrong hand, it affects your balance. So I had very stable gait. I was my mom's escort. And so my mother had read Emily Post, which was a big, thick book on manners, including how you put silverware out and all that. So even though we grew up very poor, I was taught very basic manners. You always open the door for a woman. You always open the door for an elderly person. You always help people. I mean, it was not charity. It was part of what you did as a responsible person who was not disabled and not elderly or whatever. And it's interesting today because just a minor thing. Like any, professional couple, like we go out to dinner as recently as last night, the night before with different couples. And it's amazing to me is how many people, men will jump in, men are usually the drivers, will jump in their car and their lady friend will be
My husband included. My husband including. Doctor.
But it's just fascinating because I can't conceptualize doing that because it was so ingrained in me to make sure that my mom was safe, she was in the house, in the vehicle, whatever you're doing. So I think we could hopefully we're going to return to better manners. And
you are the last gentleman alive, doctor. You are the last one.
I'm arguing that we're going to bring it back, and I think that ties in with charity because some of what you mentioned is good manners as well as
it's being aware. It's just being aware, doctor. It's just being aware. It's just looking around you, see the need, identify the need, and that's what makes you a good businessman. That's what makes you a good philanthropist. That's what makes you a good person. Just look around you, see what people need, identify it, and move forward with it. This is the way I look at things.
Well, it sounds like a very healthy approach. And that sounds like you're doing a wonderful job of bringing your daughters around, and they're going to be an asset to the community for many decades to come. And as you know, we try and keep these interviews short because we interview busy people like you. We don't want to take you off track too much. But tell our audience how do they get information on you, your company, and your charitable activities? How do they get that information?
So my company is Insignia LLC, so insigniacra.com. You can go online and see everything that we have, all the projects we have. If you want to invest with us, you're welcome to come and invest. We have amazing projects. All the projects are around the community. All the projects are live, play, work. We do everything together. It's like you don't really need to leave the area. You don't even need a car. You can You have the restaurants, you have your apartment, you have whatever you need, office buildings, everything in one community area, which is amazing, I think, what we do. Regarding the philanthropic work, we have Lazarian Girls Do Good, Be Good. It's that simple. We have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page, Lazarian Girls Do Good, Be Good. It's just simple philosophy of life. Be a good person. Do good things. Be kind to the person next to you. Everything we are and everything I am is all about kindness and understanding and talking to people and being accepting and understanding that sometimes some people are mean one day or having a bad day, but it's just that moment. They're just having a bad day or a bad moment in that moment. And always keep your mind open. Always give the people the benefit of the doubt. You know, when I talk about philanthropy, it's a simple thing. I go in front of children and I say, okay, I'm a philanthropist. I want to be a philanthropist. This is my lifelong dream. I'm a philanthropist. I don't have any money. I take my pockets out. I have no money. What can I do? I don't have any $1 to give you. I got nothing. What can I do? And kids themselves come up with this amazing idea. Girls have beautiful long hair. They donate their hair to Locks of Love, to kids with cancer. Beautiful ballerinas can dance. We go to the elderly home and we entertain the elderly and we teach them how. We don't really teach them, but we show them how to dance and we show the elderly lady how to hold the hand like this and how to move. And it's also making them smile and laugh and everybody's giggling. And it's really, really sweet. We go to the dog shelter. We read a book for the dogs. So young kids that just learning now how to read, they're practicing their reading, but they're reading to the dog. So they make even a bigger effort to read a full book to the dog because the dog is by himself and nobody talks to him. And the dogs are just so happy to see the kids coming and taking them out for a walk and talking to them. So anybody can be a philanthropist. Any person in the world can be a philanthropist. It's just wanting and understanding that there is a need out there and fulfilling the need and not trusting someone else to do it. You always say, okay, this dog is going to be fine. This person is going to be fine. Someone is going to take care of him. Be that someone. Raise up, elevate yourself and make sure that you rose up for the occasion and you took care of the issue that was in hand.
I've been advocating for recycling for 50 years. I recall the first Earth Day and the early days of recycling home waste when I was a young college student in Philadelphia. Most of us recycle aluminum cans, various bottles, and cardboard. In some places, we're able to recycle certain plastics and even yard waste these days. Generally, while if you're patient, you might get a few dollars for aluminum cans. Most of the time, most of us don't bother to try and get paid for our recycling. However, a recent article noted that Target chain has announced that it might be possible to sell them some of your electronics. Target calls it the trade-in program. They will take used smartphones, tablets, smartwatches, smart speakers, headphones, video games, and video game consoles. This is great since I know I have a bunch of stuff taking up the closet space and I hate to throw the stuff in the trash. Go to Target website for details. And by the way, you get paid in Target credit. You don't get cash. It was noted that presently only 17% of electronic waste is being recycled. Note that Amazon, Best Buy, and Staples all have similar programs. Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. The major realtor MLS settlement takes effect. A major settlement between the National Board of Realtors and the Department of Justice took effect on August 17th. The theory of the DOJ is that charging commissions in a lump sum through the MLS reduced competition and that it meant that buyers thought they were getting free services. Of course, what was happening was that the seller would add the commission for both sides to the sale price of their house. In reality, the home could still not be sold for more than market value, right? If you bought or sold a house in certain states using a realtor, you may have already received a notice of an application for a possible class action settlement. There is $418 million set aside for persons who may have paid too much commission in MLS-listed properties. For others, you may not notice the difference until you try to buy your next home. The background on this is the infamous 6% sales commission generally charged in the U.S. to residential sellers. This is usually split 3% each to the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. The feds have hated this for years. Interestingly, while I'm against big monopolies, I have not opposed this practice. Why? Because the work involved in representing buyers and sellers is hard. The way the 6% was split made it a fair deal. Further, when the homes were over $1 million, the 6% was generally reduced on a sliding scale. Under the new Realtor MLS settlement, the offer compensation to the buyer's agent can no longer be included in the MLS listing. In fact, no offers of compensation can now be done through MLS or enabled through MLS. I believe this part of the settlement will be a big mess going forward. What will happen is that buyer's agents will have to negotiate with their client to get paid if the seller does not agree to make a deal to cover part of the fee. Frankly, this could cause many Americans to buy a house without an agent. That would put them at the mercy of the seller's agent. Due to the complexity of real estate deals, I do encourage buyers to use the services of a licensed agent. And remember, the listing agent owes her loyalty to the seller, not the buyer. So if you're the buyer, you've got to be careful. The other main part of the deal is okay with me. It prescribes that every buyer's agent should have a written contract with their client. In most states, this is already the law if the agent wants to collect a fee. The U.S. Supreme Court rules against a foreign national and clarifies certain rules. So in 2010, Sandra, a legal U.S. citizen, married Luis, who apparently was here illegally. She applied with the Federal Citizenship and Immigration Service, CIS, to get an immigrant visa for him. However, to get that visa, he had to apply from his home country pursuant to the rules. So he returned to El Salvador and reported to the U.S. Embassy. The consular officer, who is a commissioned foreign service officer in the State Department, interviewed Luis and ruled that he was ineligible for a visa per U.S. law. The reason, pretty interesting, was that he reportedly was a member of the gang MS-13, very bad gang. This was based on specific tattoos that he has. So Sandra sued the federal government on the basis that she was being denied her Fifth Amendment rights since she was being deprived of liberty without due process. The U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California ruled that the State Department had to provide Sandra an explanation for denying her husband a visa. However, the fight was not over. The State Department, in this case, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, also known as SCOTUS. SCOTUS overturned the Ninth Circuit and ruled that the U.S. citizen can't force a court to review a consular officer's decision that was made abroad. The concept behind the ruling is quite interesting. A U.S. citizen has no legal interest in the visa application of a third party, even a relative. So there was no constitutional right to bring a non-citizen spouse to the United States. All foreign nationals, even alien spouses, must qualify for a visa under U.S. law to come here, is the effect of this ruling. From a business perspective, if every consular officer's decision overseas could be subject to court review in the United States, the currently already overwhelmed immigration system would be even further underwater. Buying a Bible in America is now considered a possible sign that you're a terrorist. No, I'm not making up that headline. The KGB was the feared secret police operated by the USSR when it was in business. In fact, Putin is reportedly a former KGB officer, and we know what a fine, upstanding citizen of the world he is. Here's a bit of history from history.com about the KGB. Anyone who dares to spread the slightest rumor against the Soviet regime will be arrested immediately and sent to a concentration camp. In practice, however, mass shootings and hangings without trials began almost immediately. Being the wrong kind of person, note this, a priest or a hungry food hoarder, or being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or simply possessing a firearm was enough to earn someone a death penalty from the newly formed revolutionary tribunals. Estimates of total dead just from the KGB range upward of 100,000. So the feds have been telling your banks and credit card companies, Notice, without a warrant, without Fourth Amendment compliance, to tell them if you bought a Bible, that's right, a Bible, folks, or a firearm, or just shopping at a sporting goods store, This is despite the fact the Constitution protects both the freedom of religion and the freedom to keep and bear arms. God forbid you should use terms like MAGA or Trump. That's right. These Americans were tagged as possible violent extremists with zero due process or even notification of criminalization, according to KTRH, a local Houston radio station. Ironically, at a time when the Biden administration has allowed in 8 million illegals, many of whom are terrorists, drug dealers, and human traffickers, they are spending valuable Fed assets to chase down those least likely to commit a criminal act. And I repeat that, the least likely to commit a criminal act. How many robbers have you seen robbing a convenience store while reading the Bible? This has to end, and it has to end now. We need to take money away from agencies that are practicing such retarded actions. And we need to start cleaning up our agencies that we rely on. Frankly, I'm hearing from a lot of my colleagues, the FBI may now be too broken to salvage. We may need to start a new agency and get rid of the trash. Our series Interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. We welcome Ken Good for his first appearance on Saving America. He graduated from Hardin-Simmons University in 1982 with a Bachelor of Arts degree. He received a Master of Education degree in 1986 from Tarleton State University. In 1989, he earned his law degree from Texas Tech School of Law, where he was a member of the Texas Tech Law Review. Mr. Good has argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, along with numerous courts of appeals, including the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He is the author of Good on Bail, a practice guide created for the bail industry professionals. In addition, he has written numerous articles on the subject of bail reform, including what successful bail reform looks like. Mr. Good is married and has 2 daughters.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I feel like I'm racing to try to catch up with you after listening to that.
Well, sometimes we have to shorten the bios so that we can have enough time for the interview part of the meeting that we have here.
Hey, the most important thing you said is I'm married and have 2 kids.
Yes, well, I'm one notch up. I've got a bunch of kids and I've got 7 grandchildren. You need to get to the next gen, you start counting the grandchildren.
I'm telling you, you're bragging now. You're making me very, very jealous.
You'll get there, I promise you. It's a trip. Well, as you know, our format is we ask our guests 3 questions. So first, tell us about the organization Professional Bondsmen of Texas.
Well, let's see. I would describe that as the voice of the bail industry in Texas. It's an organization that's made up of bail bondsmen across the state of Texas, but they also are very active. They have a legislative committee, so they're active at the legislature. I'm on the board of directors, and I'm on the legislative committee. We propose bills to the legislature, and we are a resource to the legislature on bail issues. And we should have an active session coming up. We have other committees that are very active. We have an annual meeting in the next few months, and so we're actively getting ready for that. And so I would describe our organization mostly as a resource to legislatures across the country and the public to educate them about bail-related issues. And I think we have a blog that highlights important stories in the criminal justice area, and we also have our own podcast, which we call the Bail Post. You can find a link to it on our website, pbtx.com, but you can also just go to thebellpost.com and you can find our shows that we've done about all kinds of different criminal justice issues.
Well, that sounds like a pretty important organization. Now, Ken, many Americans are concerned about persons accused of serious crimes being released without cash bond. Does that really make the community less safe?
I think that we are finding, well, we've always said yes. The answer to that question is yes. But I think during COVID, we found that there was a lot of data that supported that. There was Yolo County in California released a study after COVID where they found that people released on uh, cash bonds by the private industry versus people released on simple release, which would be no cash bail. It's just called different things across the country. That people released on just simple release with their promise to come back had a 200% greater chance of committing a violent offense in the next 18 months. And that's, I think, a devastating number. I mean, think about it. Just the type of release that you're using puts the defendant or has a 200% greater chance of putting them in a worse position. How is that even possible? Well, the way it works is once you're released, the release mechanism determines your rate of return. So, the private industry has the lowest failure to appear rate. These no cash bail systems have a very high failure to appear rate. So if there's an 80% chance, like in all misdemeanor courts in California, because they use simple release, if there's an 80% chance you're not going to come back to court, or that your case is going to be put on hold until you come back because you missed court, well, there's a great risk that is going to create chaos because the same number of cases are being filed on average. And that puts an incredible pressure on courts to just dismiss cases. Chaos creates de facto decriminalization. De facto decriminalization is a green light for criminals to commit more crime. And that's what we've seen.
Well, it does seem that that this situation is really, we're running kind of a test situation here in parts of the country with this no cash bail. And it sounds like the report so far is it's not working.
I think that's absolutely correct. And the problem is, it's not that we are trying something that we have studies that say we should try this. We're trying something that's never been done. And we're trying something that the experts would say there's nothing compatible with the private industry. That's the reason why it's been around for 200 years. All of these other things we're trying have not been tested. They've never been shown to work, and they have a huge failure to appear rate. But we're doing them anyway. So we're having the same results that we've had in the past.
Amazing. And I have to ask kind of an entertainment question as our third question today is, there's been a reality TV show about bail bondsmen. There was a fictional show, Lee Majors, The Fall Guy, where he was a professional stuntman, but when he wasn't doing that, he was out finding people that had skipped out on their bail. And of course, if the accused skips out on their bail, your bonding company still has to pay that cash to the court if they can't deliver the person. So how does what we've seen on television compare with what happens in your day-to-day life?
Well, I think the day-to-day life is a lot more boring. There's always a few exceptions to the rule, but let's start with the general stuff. So when you fail to miss court, you get scared. You don't know what's going to happen. So the bondsman calls you, talks to your family, and assures you, hey, this is what you can expect. Come on, we'll walk you back to court. And so I would say a large number of time people just get a call, they trust their bondsman, they go back to court, they get their case back on track pretty quickly. But the problem is, like in Texas, bondsmen don't have the ability to arrest. So we can find them, and then we can call the police and say, hey, we know where the defendant is. There's a warrant for his arrest. Will you come and pick him up? Okay, that's another area. But then there's the people that are, they know what's going to happen to them if they go to court. And so they know they're going to spend some time in the pokey. And so they're not going to come back willingly. And so we have to hire what we would call recovery agents. And I think that some of those are what maybe the extreme cases are what you see television shows about. And that's what people who are paid to go and serve that warrant and take them back into custody. There's been some cases on that recently that are very eye-opening, people crossing state lines with someone, and if they don't have the authority to do that, they get the bond, the recovery agent gets charged with kidnapping under the federal statute. So I think we're becoming very adverse of what we can and cannot do. We don't want to cross the lines, and we don't want to be too aggressive, but we also want people to fulfill their promises to go to court. And if they don't, then we have agreed that we will do everything that we can that's legally possible to get them to court. The bonding companies in Texas cannot arrest, but we can hire private detectives who can. And so that's what happens in the extreme cases if we cannot convince them to come back.
Ken W. Good, this has been fascinating. This is such an interesting area. How can our audience get more information about you and about the professional bondsman of Texas?
They can go to our website, pbtx.com. We also have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter account. They're all linked on our Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel. We have, as I've mentioned before, we have our own podcast called the Bell Post. And we have a blog where we highlight all these stories in the criminal justice realm. I think it's so important that we're out here telling this story of how the criminal justice system works, because if you just listen to the advocates for change, I don't know if anyone's telling the story that we're telling, and that is something that's been around for 200 years and why it works and why it works so well. It just does one thing and it gets people back to court. All you hear is we need to change, we need to be more fair, that what we're currently doing is not constitutional, even though the courts keep saying it's constitutional. And so we're highlighting really the good stories of the criminal justice system, even though all you hear in the news sometimes is the bad.
I understand. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. As we grow up, a common reference for success or failure is the letter grade. Whether we're in grammar school or college, we all want an A grade and certainly regard an F as a big failure. Here at Saving America, we scan the news for reports of celebrities, politicians, or others who just end up in the public eye. So the A grades are awarded to people and organizations for great service to their communities, and the F grades, of course, are unfortunately more common, are awarded to those who need to do a lot better. Singled out for a coveted A grade is a well-known Houston figure, Jim McIngvale, also known as Mattress Mac. I had the honor of speaking at the same entrepreneurial seminars as McIngvale in the late 1980s at Rice University. It was fun to hear him then, and I envy his ability to risk a lot to gain a lot. Since the early 1980s, McIngvale took a ragtag collection of model homes on the North Freeway and turned gallery furniture into a household name while grossing millions and actually hundreds of millions of dollars. He is also known for supporting Houston and Texas sports teams and wagering on those teams. In turn, he provides rebates to customers tied to the performance of those teams. However, his A grade today is tied to the charitable work he does through his furniture enterprise. He supports Houston like no other entrepreneur. He provides his North Freeway store as a refuge for people impacted by hurricanes. He actually has his own water rescue craft during floods. Following Hurricane Beryl, very recently, he provided shelter and other resources to Houstonians. In fact, Governor Greg Abbott selected the North Freeway store as the site for his post-Beryl press conference. Therefore, Saving America awards an A grade to Gallery Furniture's Jim McIngvale for his consistent support of the citizens of Houston and the surrounding area. The murder of Harris County Deputy Sheriff Maher Husseini attracts national attention. On September 3rd, a Harris County sheriff was shot to death in his car on the way to work. The sheriff was Maher Husseini, whose friends and family report was truly one of the good guys. From the beginning, it appeared that this was a targeted shooting. It turns out the story behind this senseless tragedy was even stranger. The alleged shooter was Arthur Muraday. He fled the scene of the shooting, was spotted the next day in Galveston, about 50 miles from Houston. A police pursuit ensued where he crashed his car into Galveston Bay. Then, bizarrely, he tried to swim away from the police. He was apprehended within 45 minutes, apparently with the assistance of a canine dog. He was treated for minor injuries and later jailed in Galveston. As his story is recorded, he is being transferred to Houston with a request by authorities that he be held without bond. Sheriff Husseini was also a partner in a security business, Jaguar Security, based here in Houston, Texas. Muraday had security companies in Dallas, Texas. Apparently, Muraday and Husseini had some contact about a year ago, according to the Jaguar Security co-owner. There was a suggestion that Murday may have been upset about losing some business to Jaguar Security. That's not clear. Local TV Channel 2 reports that several of Murday's businesses in Dallas had their charters revoked over the last 2 years. I saw some of the paperwork on it. It's official from the state government of Texas. Not surprisingly, Murday's sister was interviewed by local press and said that her brother was suffering a mental breakdown. Given the behavior reported, he may be indeed laying the foundation for an insanity defense. In this time when there have been far too many of our heroes in blue killed and injured, this story is even more compelling given the person behind the headline. I extend my sympathy to the family of the victim and to the others impacted by this senseless tragedy. Gun manufacturers asked the U.S. Supreme Court to block Mexico's $10 billion lawsuit against them. I've recently criticized Mexico for continuing its decline with a new president who's even further left than the previous one. The Mexican government has lost control of its borders, and it is not maintaining control and providing security for its people or for Americans. Instead of taking responsibility for this, the scumballs in Mexico tried to file a lawsuit that claimed U.S. companies were intentionally undermining Mexico's tough gun laws by making military-style assault weapons. And these, of course, are finding their way to the drug cartels and the other criminals in Mexico. Well, in the first round, U.S. District Judge F. Dennis Saylor in Massachusetts, which is not necessarily a big pro-gun state, dismissed the case. Judge Saylor found that the Federal Prosecution of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, the PLCAA of 2005, and I quote, unequivocally bars lawsuits seeking to hold gun manufacturers responsible for the acts of individuals using guns for their intended purpose. The PLCAA was enacted to protect the industry from frivolous lawsuits like this one filed by Mexico. But in January 2024, an anti-American three-judge panel of the First Circuit Court of Appeals reversed, returning the case to the district court. And that meant that the lawsuit could then proceed again. However, the gun makers have now gone to SCOTUS to have the case thrown out, and I do expect that the current Supreme Court will throw the case out. Folks, in turn, I think the United States needs to file a $10 trillion action against Mexico for allowing the cartels to flourish, preventing a threat to all U.S. citizens. Mexico has allowed the cartels to engage in drug dealing, human trafficking, and an untold number of terrorists to cross through its border and cause harm to the United States. It's hard to estimate the harm that Mexico's failed state has allowed to be caused in the United States. Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.